Hey, welcome to the show. I'm sure most of you have seen these little kind of clever little pocket knives that are designed to look like keys. I've been noticing these things in checkout lines and stuff for probably a year or two now, and this last time I was at Harbor Freight, they were having a sale. They were selling these for 99 cents, so I figured the time was right to buy one. So I've been playing with it the last few days, just kind of seeing how it works and testing the quality of it, testing the strength of it, and I have to say, for a buck or two, it's actually a pretty decent little tool. And of course, it's very convenient. I mean, you put it on your key ring and you have it with you. But it's a little bit limited. I mean, it's about a 1-inch blade, and that's really all it is. And what I've found is that what I'm usually looking for is I'm looking for something that'll work as a screwdriver, and maybe secondarily something that'll work as a knife. Believe me when I tell you, my keys have seen a lot of abuse, as I have attempted to do things with them that you're not supposed to do with keys. And so far I've been lucky and I haven't broken one. But I figured it'd be really nice to have a tool like this one, but maybe a little more durable, and that could at least function as a screwdriver as well as a knife. I have this piece of sheet steel, and I thought it was 16 gauge, but it's actually a little thicker than that. So I thought I would try making a tool out of it that would basically be the shape and size of a key, but would serve as both a knife and a screwdriver. And I knew if I designed it right, I could probably use it for both Phillips and flathead screws, kind of depending on the size of the screw. I decided to make it in one piece. There are a couple advantages to that. One, it's obviously much simpler. There's really nothing that can go wrong with it. You know, it's not going to break or come apart or fall open in your pocket if it's just one piece. So I found a scrap that looked to be about the right size. I took a pen and drew an outline. Normally I'd probably use a marker for this or something that stands out a little more, but I wanted to have fairly fine lines so I knew exactly what I was cutting to. Now I happen to have a few power tools, and so I used a grinder for this, and later on you'll see I used a Dremel type tool. But you could certainly do this with hand tools. You know, I could have used a hacksaw. It would have taken longer to make these cuts, but probably not much longer. And you'll see as the project progresses, there isn't really any point where I do any work that couldn't be done with very simple hand tools. In fact, a hacksaw and a metal file is really all you'd need to finish this project. Oh, and I would also recommend a bench vise, preferably one that's a little larger and maybe higher quality than the one I'm using here. Metal kept on sort of flipping up and trying to slip out of the vise, which definitely made the process a lot more frustrating. So after roughing out the shape with the cutting disc on the grinder, I tried to work a little bit on the belt sander to clean it up. And what I found was there was just no way to hold on to it. At least not without risking damage to my fingers, which, by the way, I have done before. So I went back to the grinder, and, you know, again, as I mentioned before, you could certainly do all of this cleanup with a file or maybe some sandpaper, but of course it goes faster if you have power tools. And to make the blade of the screwdriver, I did use the belt sander. I used a 36 grit belt, which was actually pretty worn out, which I kind of like because 36 grit is really aggressive. And having a worn belt gives me an opportunity to do a little bit finer work. I tested the screwdriver on a couple of different screws. I obviously knew it would work for a flathead screw, but I wanted to be sure that it was the right dimensions to fit in a Phillips. I think this is probably a P2. It was a little bit of a snug fit, but I could actually get it in there and could get it to work. Once I had that figured out, I tried a few different things for putting a blade on this, and at first I thought I would just have like a really, really small area. I figured that would maybe minimize the chance of me reaching into my pocket and cutting myself on the blade of this thing once it sharpened up. So here I used the grinder again just to get that started and move a lot of metal quickly. And then I came back in with a round file and finished it up. Now I tested that and it actually worked fairly well, and at this stage that was all I planned to do, but you'll see a little bit later that I sharpened up a lot more of it. One note, of course I didn't sharpen this thing up to razor sharp. I just put enough of an edge on there that I could use it to open boxes and cut through those annoying plastic tags that they have on clothes when you buy them and stuff like that. Next I had to drill the hole for the key ring to fit through. And this was the part where I learned that this steel was actually surprisingly tough. That drill bit just did not want to go through. And again, this is not real thick steel. It's a little bit thicker than a 16 gauge. But I kept adding a little bit of water to keep things cool, and I kept working at it. And eventually I drilled through. This is probably the only part of the project where you really need to use a power tool. But if you don't have a drill laying around, knock on your neighbor's door and borrow one. And as often happens, no matter how good a job I do of starting the hole centered, by the time I get it drilled, it's always a little off. So I went back in with the file and cleaned that up so it was more or less centered. So here I decided that I would expand the area that was sharpened a little bit. I kept working further and further down the side of the key. And of course I got bored using the file, so I went and dug out the Dremel. And right away realized I was going to have to switch to a new sanding wheel. And for a moment I was like, oh man, I need to find a screwdriver. And then I realized, oh, I have a screwdriver right here. So I actually got to use my pocket screwdriver tool before it was even finished. So after I had that done to my satisfaction, I went in and I used some 200 grit, or I think it was 220 grit sandpaper, and I even brought it all the way down to 400 grit and really cleaned it up. So I felt like I was pretty proud of this. So still haven't made a touch mark yet, but I went in there and stamped in FFX on the key. But it just kept bothering me that that edge wasn't real clean and neat. I kept thinking, you know, if I just had a nice big rectangular file, it would be real easy to clean that edge up and just put in one nice, well-defined edge. So after arguing back and forth with myself for about half an hour, I finally gave in to my inner perfectionist, brought it back out and finished it off with the file. And I have to say, I'm glad I did, because I think it turned out real well in the end. So that's it, the finished product. The first time through, it probably took me 2 hours to do this. I was really taking my time and thinking through each step. But now that I've done one of them, I think a guy could probably do this project in about 30 to 45 minutes. Now, is it really worth it when you can buy a pretty similar tool for $1 or $2 at the store? I'll let you be the judge of that. But for me, it was a fun project. It was an idea that had been bouncing around in my head for a little while. I learned a lot along the way. In fact, one of the things I learned is that sometimes you may think that a power tool is the best tool for a job, but sometimes, especially for a simple job, an old-fashioned metal file can work wonders. So I hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, throw me a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and we'll see you in the next video.